Tragically, ethnic violence will always be with us.
But communities of faith should do everything they can to prevent such actions.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Welcome, viewers. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Andrea Luxton. I'm president of Andrews University in Michigan, and I'm today's moderator. We have a fascinating conversation ahead, but I'd like you to first meet our panelists.
Hi, I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the Senior Strategist for Missional Ministries for a network of churches in the state of Texas, and I'm a Baptist minister.
My name is Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I'm also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
And I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I serve as senior minister at First Christian Church in downtown Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm professor of ethics and history at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
Welcome to our panelists, and now for a very important topic. After an ethnically motivated attack in June 2022 in the village of Gutsu, Ethiopia, that likely left more than 300 dead, Ethiopia's Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, declared, "There is zero tolerance for horrific acts claiming lives recently in both Benishangul and Oromia regions by elements whose main objective is to terrorize communities." Yet despite the outcry of Prime Minister Ahmed and similar statements by leaders throughout the world, when events such as this happen, little seems to change. And on the surface, communities that profess to be communities of faith often seem to act no differently. In fact, on occasions, it is religious intolerance that seems to exacerbate the violent attacks. Reasons given for ethnic or racial intolerance and violence are necessarily complex. Political and personal agendas cloud attempts to seek ways forward that focus on human dignity and peaceful cooperation. In the midst of this constant repetition, nationally and internationally, of hatred and self-interest stoking violence, is there anything more that individuals of faith or faith communities can do to change the trajectory of human interactions, whether on a local, national, or international level? So the panelists are asked to consider the following questions. Are you aware of situations where intervention by those of faith has brought greater peace and understanding? And if so, is this a model for elsewhere? What makes individuals of faith believe that the sword or gun is justifiable in an attack on other individuals? And how would you counter this position? And finally, and simply, is there hope for humanity? I'd like to pass back to our panelists who began our conversation for the opening remarks.
Yes, there is hope for humanity. I would say there is. But I really don't want to just go over and not suggest that ethnocentrism and the violence and hatred that often result from that are somehow miraculously going to go away in our world. Because I think as human beings, we are fallen creatures, and we are very interested in ourselves. We are, Luther put it in curvatus and say, we're curved in on ourselves. We tend to like our belly buttons, and culture groups like their own collective belly buttons as well. And when they're threatened, oftentimes their first reaction isn't peace, but war or conflict or hatred. And that's where it's coming out of the doctrine of sin that I make that suggestion. That said, that's not where it ends, because we as people of redemption also know that there's opportunity for reconciliation, and that's pretty challenging, though, especially when you're talking about large groups of people. I think one of the things I would like to at least begin with is to define ethnicity, and this is a definition I get. I've just at a conference, and I like the definition here. It's a grouping of persons that unify and that are unified and identified based on similar experiences, shared traditions, shared histories, shared religion, shared language, or whatever else causes those members to identify and maintain loyalty to the group. And this tends to be, I mean, all of us have those groups. We need groups actually like that. And, but I also believe that, at least for those of us who are Christian, to turn to the New Testament, we find some powerful examples of where ethnicity was overcome. I mean, even the vision in Revelation chapter 7, you have the vision, the celestial vision has people of all ethnicities and languages and peoples and nations. And so I think that we have an image of what it is to be in the reign of God, both together, and maintaining our own identities and our own traditions. Of course, that's with Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord overall. But that said, I think that even their practical, I mean, you take a look at Acts. I mean, Acts is a really kind of an accounting of how the early church struggled to overcome their tensions between their Jewish roots and their new Hellenistic roots. I mean, you have the serving in Acts 6, I believe it is, and the widows and the distribution and the tensions between the Hellenistic widows and the Hebrew widows, and it would seem to be caused by ethnicity. And you also have Cornelius, Peter visiting Cornelius' house after the vision and realizing that there are foods, that all food is clean to God. And so I think that Christianity has the resources, when those resources are utilized, to help us think about ethnicity in a way that makes it not a person's full identity, but it's one that they have that's grounded and centered in Jesus Christ. And I mean, I guess that would be the first place to start. I mean, it's complicated because we're humans, and it's in the richness of the detail that the problems arise. But I think that would be, for me, the first starting point.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much for those comments, and it's good being here. Ethnic hatred. I read an article, I think it was in The Diplomat, titled, "As Global Democracy Retreats, Ethnic Cleansing is on the Rise." And the article talks about as democracies around the world retreat, others feel emboldened to really attack and take over and participate in demographic engineering. Some would argue that we see this taking place in places like China and Russia. Appleby writes about, gives us some solutions on this whole ideal of what the church can do to help us kind of limit the racial hatred. And as Brother Carl mentioned, we are human, and we live in a fallen world. Sin is real. People treat folks with disrespect, and all kinds of atrocities take place. But I like what Appleby talks about. He talks about that if we're going to try to put a dent in this, we need to remember that there's something called the similarity in all people. You know, we're similar in so many different ways. He talks about biologically, you know, human anatomy, reproduction, and all bodily functions are primarily the same worldwide. He also talks about the spiritual similarity, that all humans, we are in need of salvation. And if we can focus on the things we have in common rather than the ones we don't have in common, we would do a lot better. I add that there's an eschatological similarity in that we have to all one day face our Maker. When you look theologically, the origin of humanity is important. We are all made in the image of God. We come from a single pair, as I understand the Scripture, and one race, one ethnic group does not have the right to view itself as superior to other races. And so I think in the church what we can do to curtail some of this is we have to teach our people when we're preaching and teaching, when we are in our Sunday school classes, when we're in our small groups, we have to talk about the origin of humanity and the fact that all of us are made in the image of God. And I think the distinctions we have in terms of color, we ought to teach our folks that, hey, these should be celebrated. There should be a time of celebration. I'm not one who subscribes to color blindness. I understand, the concept, but I think it's important to see color, and when we see it, we can say, okay, this is a white man right next to me, right? I'm a black man. We actually see it, and it's a time to celebrate that. But the hatred, it's a lack of respect for the fact that people are made in the image of God, thinking that one race or ethnicity is superior to that of others, and ethnic hatred is just just pure evil. To attempt to murder anyone, because and let alone to wipe out their entire race, that's evil in my opinion. And a lot of the folks are on power trip, and they just really need some help. But I think the church can do a lot to teach the people and help the folks accept each other in the world.
Thank you.
Yes, I have a hard time getting my head wrapped around this question. In large part, I think because it's never impacted me directly. At least, mostly it has never impacted me directly. I live in a very ethnically diverse neighborhood, which I chose to live in for the last 40 years. I go to a very ethnically diverse church, and I have a hard time understanding the animosity that goes along with certain ethnic groups or certain concerns about ethnic groups. When I look at these people, I see difference, and this difference is something that we can celebrate. I mean, God is a great, in a sense, inventor of difference. Men and women, black, white, yellow, red, whatever, plants, animals, creation is full of diversity. And I think that God is very much at the heart of that. And I also agree, Carl, with your call out to sin, because I think sin stands at the very basis of this kind of hatred that develops between various ethnic groups. I think about that, and I look at that and I say, well, the first thing is difference. They're different from me. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, see? I mean, but as a Christian, I have to say, if God is behind all of this diversity, why can't I embrace that? Why can't I? Or I could look at it and say, they're different. What could I gain by going against them? Or what am I likely to lose? So fear becomes a huge part of how we view difference, I think, in ordinary everyday life. When I look at all the ethnic issues around the world, and I think about the breakup of Yugoslavia and Kosovo and Croatia and all of those, when I think about the breakup of really the war now between Ukraine and Russia, I don't want to say that's an ethnic issue. I want to say that's a religious issue. I want to say that's a power issue. And yet they're arguing that it is an ethnic issue. These people are ethnically Russian, therefore they should be subservient to us in Russia. I'm disappointed with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, who is a Pentecostal believer. and yet he is quite willing to develop strong military responses to those with whom he disagrees ethnically. I just feel like this is a very difficult issue. I don't care where you are. What I am very thankful for is the recent apology that Pope Francis made in Canada to the Indigenous people, the First Nations folk. I mean, that to me was a huge step to healing past injustices, but also to help people understand that ethnicity is not the issue. It's sin, it's selfishness, it's fear, it's power, it's control, it's all of these kinds of things that we say are not good for Christians to be expressing. So I look forward to a time when we can have greater stability. And I have to say that ethnic hatred is not something ever that is in a part of who we are as human beings, but it is taught to us even as children. We end up getting the kinds of concerns and the kinds of discriminatory understandings and so forth against other groups, and there is no reason for it other than sin.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you. I think we need to realize, we need to begin understanding that all of us come from somewhere else. Each of us is an immigrant, and each of us is foreigner to somebody. In fact, each of us is foreigner to almost everybody. And that helps us to understand, particularly those of us who look like me and have always functioned within the dominant white American context, helps us to understand that no, we do bear resemblance to folk that are very different from us, simply because each of us straddles a hyphen. Okay, that's a term I came across preparing for a sermon the other day. That you know, we're all European Americans or African Americans or Asian Americans or American doesn't have to be the end of that, but each of us is something on that hyphen in between what we used to be, what we were before, and where we're going, or what we will be in God's gracious future. And our faith teaches us that where we are now and the groups that we relate to now are not the be all and end all. Yes, we need to understand ourselves as part of something larger than ourselves, but that doesn't mean that that group that we relate to, that ethnicity, does not need to understand itself as, again, a part of something larger than that, which is the whole family of God.
So what do we do?
Well, I think one of the things is that we need to have ways that are, it takes more background explanation, but I think we need controlled ways in which we encounter people of other ethnicities so that we realize the common humanity that we share. In other words, it's easy for me to be distant from a group or people and begin to have prejudices and other kinds of ideas about people. But once you encounter and have conversations, or you share a meal, or it changes the nature of the relationship. And I think it begins at that fundamental level.
And I think it also includes calling out those expressions of hateful tribalism. And we see those all over the place.
Okay, we need to take a break. Thank you.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back, and we do very much thank you for watching and for joining us. Difficult topic today, and let's hear what our panelists have to say in conclusion.
Yeah, in conclusion, I want to just say that the religious community, we should lead the way in showing the world how to get along cross-racially, along different ethnic lines, and I think that's part of leadership. We just need to show the world that we can get along. I think people still say that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour, that we have. And I'll close with, Carl mentioned a passage, and I just want to close and read that in Revelation. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. It's a beautiful picture of a multitude of varied races and cultures coming together, worshiping the Lord.
Thank you. Recent Pew research indicated that 1/3 of the people in the Middle East see religious and ethnic hatred as the greatest problem that the world faces, the greatest threat to world stability. So perhaps despite all our valid concerns about, democracy versus autocracy and disease and crime and all the rest, the thing we should really be concerned about is how American Christianity, and this is a panel of all Christians today, how American Christianity is being identified as solely of one political stripe, as being embedded with white nationalism, which is America's brand of ethnic tribalism. And we need to call that out, because just as religion can bring out the very best in us, it can also bring out the very worst in human beings.
Yeah, I have a quote from Rwanda about Christian groups that were killing one another. The blood of ethnicity calls more than the water of baptism. That's how powerful that hold is. And again, how do we flip that so that we think about the waters of baptism being unifying? And I mean, even broader, just our common humanity, apart even, because unfortunately religion plays into that ethnocentrism. Very briefly, there's an experiment done in the 50s called the Robber Cave experiment. I don't know if any of you are familiar. It was some sociologists who took some high school students from the same high school, same ethnicity, and brought them out into Oklahoma and set them in 2 different camps. And they let them just work their own identities out as a group of young men, boys, 14 years old. It probably wouldn't even be legal anymore to do this experiment. But they brought them together, and they found out that the animosity was really hot between the 2 groups after they brought them out. And they found out that just having people together of different groups doesn't solve the problem. You actually have to have a deeper facilitated discussion and ways of approaching how to handle difference. And I guess where I'm going with that is, I don't think that just bringing us in contact with each other is going to do it. We have to have really concentrated efforts at open conversation and compassion and empathy to move forward in this.
I would agree with you, and probably with the results of that study, but I don't know whether it needs to be facilitated, but it certainly needs to be the case that we open ourselves up to the other in some way, shape, or form. Now, I am a long way from perfect, especially, even on this issue where I've worked all of my adult life on different aspects of it. For instance, as a Pentecostal, I owe the African American church a great deal for my experience as a Pentecostal. That meant that I had to study African Americans. I had to attend their services. I had to see, how are they different? How are they the same? What do we share in common? And it was enormous. And what I found is I have developed scores of African American friends through that relationship. Those relationships are really important on how we deal with these things. I live in Southern California, where we're surrounded by Latinos. And I have lots of Latino students through the years. And I remember making a huge mistake on Cinco de Mayo. And I called a meeting of Latinos at Fuller and said, we're going to talk about how we can better integrate you within this center. They said, do you know what day it is? I said, no. They said, it's Cinco de Mayo. Well, it was a huge learning experience for me. So those kinds of things really open you up. Of course, now my sons have all married Latinas. So, I'm learning how that fits with family. And then again, I sit on the Pacific Rim. So we have all of this Asian hatred right now. I do not understand that at all. I've had lots of Asian students, Koreans, Chinese, from house churches, from the registered church, all of these kinds of people at one point, and they have taught me a great deal. So, it's the exposure and the willingness to embrace what they have to teach us that I think can make a huge difference in our ethnic hatred or love.
Thank you all so much, and I guess our message to our viewers today is don't assume this is out there. This is something, the ideal that God gives us, and how we're living is very different. The solution lies with all of us. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.